Today we are going to talk about the conclusion of the Revolutionary War. We'll focus on the last battle of the war, Yorktown. Also, the solution to the Revolutionary War, the Treaty of Paris, which may sound familiar to you, but yes, there's a second one. And also the impact of the revolution on the country as well as the rest of the world. So the battles start to move southward. We start in New England with the first battles of the war, move to the middle colonies in which we have the turning point of Saratoga, and now we end the war in the southern colonies. So the British are trying to take over the major ports in the south, and they're able to take over Charleston, or Charlestown at the time, and also Savannah. The Americans' position in the South had improved, but the British still had a lead after capturing those major towns. The Americans were able to gain a victory at Cowpens, which is South Carolina, and that weakened the British. So at this point, the only ports were Charlestown and Savannah, but those are very important ports. The conclusion of the war happens in Yorktown. General Cornwallis, who's the general for the British Army, became trapped by French ships and also Washington's troops by land and sea. So they got him from the land side with Washington's troops, and then the French brought in their ships from the water side, and they were able to capture Yorktown. Finally, Cornwallis surrendered to the Americans at Yorktown, where they had the victory. So Yorktown occurred in 1781, but the war didn't officially conclude until the Treaty of Paris in 1783. The king wanted to continue fighting. This is the King of England, but the Parliament called for peace, which ended the war. So there's conflict between the king and the monarch of England and the Parliament, which is kind of like their Congress, but the Parliament ended up winning out in that battle. So the Treaty of Paris was a series of peace talks in Paris between the United States and the British, and it led to an agreement in which the British recognized the United States as independent. As we know, the United States already recognized itself in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence, but the British officially recognized them as independent with the Treaty of Paris in 1783. New boundaries were set for the United States, so they had the Atlantic to the east, Canada to the north, and then the Mississippi River was its western boundary. Florida was its boundary in the south. The United States agreed to restore rights and property to the Loyalists. Remember, the Loyalists are the people that agreed with the British, and there was still tension between them. However, they did ignore this part of the treaty, and it wasn't really ever done. There were still tensions between these groups. The treaty was recognized and agreed upon in 1783, officially announcing the United States as an independent nation, and the British would leave their ruling in the United States. It was no longer their colonies. So from here on out, the United States needs to build itself as a country. They're recognized as individual states instead of colonies, and then collectively, they're recognized as the United States of America. So from this point on, they need to start building a government, establishing rules, laws, and regulations, maintaining trade relationships and alliances, and helping themselves build themselves into the world power that they are today. What type of impact did this revolution have on our country as well as the rest of the world? It created a nation of 13 independent states linked by customs and history. So in our country, we don't have one big piece of land. There's lots of different states. Started with 13, now we have 50, that are roughly different from the others, but they still share common elements of freedom and independence and prosperity, and we still link those to our beliefs of today. The Declaration of Independence cemented their rights, and it continues to today. So although the colonists recognized themselves as independent, from the end of the war on, the rest of the world recognized them as independent as well, and we still hold those beliefs and values that we read in the Declaration of Independence today. It also influenced other revolutions throughout the world and influenced other people and motivated them to seek out their independence as well. In 1789, French citizens rebelled against the monarchy in France, and the leaders of that revolution looked to the United States as an example. There's a period of enlightenment where people seek out independent and individual interests rather than the rights of all. And by doing this, you see lower classes rise to the top and try to overthrow their strong monarchies. And in France, in the French Revolution, this is an example of that. They also established their own document that was very similar to the Declaration of Independence, known as the Declaration of the Rights of Man. It had the same values of natural rights, and that as a born citizen, you should be entitled to freedom, independence, and prosperity. It also inspired later movements in Latin America. So in Latin America, we see a lot of inspiration in trying to overthrow corrupt leaders that try to take away these natural liberties. And we still see this history of revolutions evolving today in the Middle East, Africa, and other nations as well. Revolutions are something that will never go away in history because there's always a group that feels suppressed and feels like they need to rise to the top. And as I've talked with you before, never underestimate the power of a small group of people, because that is the only thing that has ever changed history, and the Revolutionary War is definitely an example of that.